Hi, everybody. It's meteorologist Joe Chaffee. I want to touch on a point that I been making on and off over the last couple of weeks, and that is that everybody seems to be always focused on the long range, and the short range kind of gets lost. And I've been at least bringing out the fact that it seems that from what the events that we've had so far, even though they have been nickel and dime events, they don't seem to show themselves until we're inside the short range, and by that I mean inside 5 days. And I want to point something out, and I'm going to illustrate this with today's run of the NAM model. Now, this is the run from late this morning. And one of the things I noticed is the weather front that's going to be coming through here approaching on Thursday. There is a wave that's going to try and develop on this, and the NAM and the European has been showing this for several days now and longer. You can pick out the wave. It's right here, okay, just off the Delaware, New Jersey coast, and then it's south of Long Island, and then you have the low that actually is printed there east of Montauk as a 997 low, and this is for Thursday evening. Now, this would basically be mostly a rain event with some little snow inland and really no big deal. And I want to just show you what the snowfall map was from that particular run. And it really, it would be it would be what you expect out of this. And that is, it would be, mostly well north and west and amounts that are not really all that, exciting for the most part for snow lovers. But one of my takeaways from that particular run was that with respect to what was happening at the upper air, and I'll just jump off to that, you can see this kind of sort of broad trough. It's a fairly cold vortex that's dropping down, but there's a couple of shortwave troughs embedded in here, none of them which are really that well defined. So, one of the things that ran through my mind was that if somehow you wound up with something better defined, a shortwave that was stronger than modeled, that you could have maybe a deeper wave that's a little further south. Now, I want to jump to the next run, which was from late this afternoon, and that particular run begins to pick up on that possible idea. And you can see here there's a pretty distinct shortwave that's just a little bit sharper than the prior run, and it kind of brings it on through, so that when you look at the surface map on this from late this afternoon, oops, wrong one. Let me jump up. Okay, so here's the surface. Now we've got the surface low from late this afternoon. This actually matched up pretty well with the European. There's your wave. It's actually a little further south. It's off the Delmarva Peninsula. And you can see where the snow line is now. It's just north of New York City and north of Route 78 in New Jersey. And then the low kind of pops out east of Cape May, south of Long Island. And then suddenly, you have it near Montauk. I mean, it still would probably mean mostly rain for the coast, but, there's a little bit more snow inland. Now, let's jump to the new 12Z, the new overnight run. And what's happening is, on the NAM at least, is that you have a much more definable low that develops. The wave starts to get going pretty far to the south. I mean, the surface low here is now sitting down in southern Virginia, and it moves over Chesapeake Bay and begins to intensify. So now you have the NAM model generating some dark blue, which would be heavier snows just to the north of New York City into Connecticut, and then the low starts to intensify fairly rapidly, so that by Friday evening you actually have precipitation further west than the prior run, and suddenly you have a 983 millibar low sitting just east of Long Island. Now, just to compare the snowfall maps that it generates out of this, I'll get a little tighter because I think you need to see it on a tighter view, and then we'll go back and do a little more analyzing here. But now look at the difference in the total snowfalls from this, because the NAM takes a fairly intense low eventually as it gets it up off eastern New England, and it produces some big snows for ski country, and actually has some 6-inch amounts down into parts of northern New Jersey and into the Hudson Valley, not that far to the north, and for the first time actually even brings some measurable to New York City and parts of Long Island, down to about Sandy Hook. So, I mean, this seems to be the trend on this model. Just to give you, I'll jump back. We'll jump back one run, and you can see the difference. How it's the snow was further north, and certainly less of it, and then you go back 2 runs and it's even more so. So the NAM model seems to be trending colder and further south with every single run. Now, we're going to have to see how other models handle all this, but what the question is going to be the formation of the wave. Now, I'll just go back. We're going to go to the GFS, and we're going to look at the long range just for laughs, because at this stage of the game, when we get into these short range issues, I really don't like to look at the long range too much, because, the short range is really what's up front and center. And I'll get to the GFS, because the GFS is a little bit different here. I think we'll use this view first. The GFS shows the wave, but it shows it much later. So, this has more of a cold front with a low on it, and then you suddenly have one surface low that's sitting over Nantucket. Now, of course, by this time, everything is just about winding down, which is Thursday evening. And the issue is, when we look at the upper air on the GFS, I mean, it does try to have that sort of definable short wave here. You can see it there on the GFS, but it still is not quite as strong as what the NAM is indicating, which is, we'll put the NAM up, and you can see it here. The NAM's got a much more definable trough here. Now, if this is the case, I think we have to be, we're going to have to be a little bit careful in terms of what we're going to do in terms of forecasts. I don't think I'm in a position now, nor do I have the confidence in wanting to come out with something now, because I want to see what the European does overnight and see if the GFS trends in this direction. The Canadian run tonight, has, kind of has the same idea, but, it's still, there's just a lot of energy running around, so it makes it a little bit difficult to discern. But when we put we'll put the surface map on the Canadian, the Canadian actually develops, the wave is developing somewhere down here over Eastern Virginia, and then takes the low actually straight east somewhere in here, but it prints the low straight east, but it's probably, in this northern part of this closed isobar, and then suddenly you have an 87 low sitting east of Cape Cod. So some kind of storm is going to develop here along the northeast coast. If the upper air feature winds up being deeper and further south, again, we'll go back to the NAM model's view. Then you could wind up with, that's a fairly intense little low that forms there. So, you want to be a little bit careful here from a forecast standpoint, that somebody in this region here could wind up getting a bit of a surprise if this is the case. Now, as far as the longer term goes, and we'll take a look at the longer term for its particular ride today. I kind of glanced at it before. I wasn't really too thrilled with it, but, who knows at this point. With everything that's going on with the blocking and everything else, there's your big blocking high. And we do have it out, over time. You keep getting this ridge that wants to pop off along the east coast. The ridge pops up a little further east. Now, this would imply cold air spreading out. You do have this ridge building up to Greenland. You do have this ridge that's building up into Alaska, but you also have, troughing. You see the primary cold flow here, and I'll mark it out. The primary flow of cold air is more to the west into the plains rather than to the east. I mean, you do get some into the east, but the core of the cold air is going to wind up going further west. Now, over time, what the GFS does is it keeps wanting to drop these troughs in the west. So, the ridge pops right back up here in the east. You get this big blocking high over Greenland. And, one of the things that, I've said also a number of times, you can have all the blocking in the world you want, but even if you have a Greenland block like this, and that's a very strong blocking high, the trough has to set up in the right spot, and it's not in the right spot you'd want it for snow. You still have a ridge along the east coast, and you still have this ridge up building up over Alaska. But again, you can have all these signals that are supposed to give you an idea of what works in the long term. But if you don't have things lined up correctly, you're not going to have these so-called perfect setups. And again, I go back to the short range. The model problem for me right now is what the NAM is signaling. And I'm going to want to wait to see what the next several runs do with this, because it does open the door even if you want to say it opens the door slightly, it does open the door to something of consequence for Thursday into Thursday night. So we want to pay attention to this. And, just to give you one other view here in terms of temperatures, when we take a look at that, with this ridge that wants to keep popping up in the east, you can see where all the below normal temperatures, they do spread out. We'll start with this weekend. It does go below normal after whatever happens on Thursday, and then we go back above normal early next week. Then that cold air tries to spread out, but that ridge keeps popping up. So as long as that happens, if that is the case, then you're not going to get cold air to settle in. It's going to be more transient in nature, in spite of the fact that you're going to have blocking going on in the upper atmosphere. So check in later today for all the latest posts on the website, meteorologistjoechaffe.com, and you can download my app and subscribe to my forecast for $1 a month if you're in the New York, New Jersey, Long Island, Connecticut, Hudson Valley, or Eastern Pennsylvania area, for more specific local forecasts for those particular zones. So have a great day, great Tuesday as everybody recovers from Christmas. And we will, of course, be discussing all of this at length later on today.